So the third type of bacteria that I'm going to introduce to you is called the Clostridium botulism. So usually we can abbreviate it as C-Bot. Some of the characteristics for Clostridium botulism include it is a gram-positive bacterium. It is also anaerobe, meaning it doesn't like oxygen. It will form spores, so you want to make sure that you need to cook your food until a certain temperature to kill the spores. It's mesophilous, and it will produce neurotoxin. So you want to be very careful. Neurotoxin usually affects your brain, so it may cause neural dysfunction. But the good thing is this neurotoxin is heat sensitive, meaning the heat can kill the spores, and therefore it will not cause foodborne illnesses. C-Bot is commonly found in dirt, agricultural products, animal, and fish's intestine. So you can usually find C-Bot in animal and fish's intestine. It is the type of toxin poisoning type. So whenever we talk about heat treatments to kill the C-Bot, we're referring to as long as you can heat your food until the right temperature, then we can kill this neurotoxin, and therefore it will not cause any foodborne illness. Some potential contaminated food that's associated with C-botulism are the low acidic made canned food, as well as the vacuum packed food, including meat, fish, and vegetables. If you consume any food item that was not properly heated and or not properly vacuum packed, for example, the package is damaged, then very likely it can be contaminated with C-botulism bacteria. So bottom line is try not to make canned products at home if you can, because if the pH condition and the temperature condition goes wrong, you may very likely create an environment for C-botulism bacteria to grow. Symptoms. So if the person is infected with C-botulism, it will show botulism and infant botulism symptoms. And some other symptoms include fatigue, headache, dizziness, vision impairment, so you can't see you may start to get blurry visions, can't see very clearly. You may experience difficulty swallowing, and if it gets worse, it may lead to respiratory paralysis. The typical incubation time for C-botulism is within 12 to 30 hours, and the duration of the food poisoning incidents you can be as short as a couple of days, but it can also be as long as a couple of years. So it's a more complex bacteria. It takes longer time to recover. So how do we prevent consumed food that's contaminated with C-botulism bacteria? First of all, proper heating as all the time. Make sure you check the temperature make sure you don't eat anything that's undercooked. Avoid handmade canned products like I mentioned earlier, because it is the right environment. It can be the right environment for C. botulism to grow. You can use nitrite as a food additive to prevent C. botulism from growing. Actually, a lot of food company, they use small amount of nitrite in their food products to help prevent C. botulism, which is acceptable, but you shouldn't be use nitrite at home by yourself, because if you got the wrong dosage, it could be lethal as well. And for infants, so for little baby, if you happen to have a baby at home, or if your friends, families have little infants, make sure you tell them to avoid eating honey before the age of 1, because they can, if the honey is contaminated with C. botulism, the infant eat the honey can very likely to develop infant botulism, which can be life-threatening as well. So make sure you don't feed infant less than 1 year old with honey. And moving on, number 4 is called Staphylococcus aureus. So you they look like golden circles under the microscope. So let's learn about their characteristics. So there are gram-positive bacterium. They are facultatively anaerobic, meaning they dislike oxygen again. They are non-spores forming, and they are heat sensitive, meaning they can be killed at high temperature. So as long as you cook your food right, you can destroy Staphylococcus. They can produce enterotoxin. So for any enterotoxin, so this is another toxin producing bacteria. And luckily, Staphylococcus, the enterotoxin produced by Staphylococcus is heat resistant. So it's very, what I mean is because the type of toxin Staphylococcus produce is heat resistant, meaning it can be difficult for them, even if you cook your food to the right temperature. Sometimes these enterotoxin can still remain in the food and not be destroyed. So Staphylococcus are commonly found in air, in water, the milk that we drink. They can also found in the food preparation areas like the countertop, the cutting boards of knife, the plates that we use. Any surfaces without proper sanitization, human skin, so even on your hands, hair and animals, you can find Staphylococcus. So some of the potential contaminated food involves lunch boxes. So in Taiwan, it's very typical for working staff to eat lunch from work. So usually people tend to order lunch boxes from outside. Or if you are going to a restaurant and you eat the dishes at a buffet, or if you like desserts, Staphylococcus can be found in these places. Also, they are commonly found in meat and processed foods. The transmission route include, for example, the saliva from the person infected with Staphylococcus aureus contaminates the food. So for example, if I sneeze and the saliva actually got into the food that I'm preparing, then I contaminated food through the saliva. Or if someone spit in the food, I assume none of the food preparation staff should be doing that. But if someone actually spit saliva into your food, that way it can cause contamination as well. Or if the infected person, the person infected with Staphylococcus actually touches the food, so they go preparing the food in the kitchen. These ways can contaminate the food, and therefore if you eat the contaminated food, you will get sick. So the symptoms associated with Staphylococcus aureus are very similar to all the previous bacteria. So it involves severe nausea and vomiting. It can cause diarrhea. It can cause abdominal cramps, but in this case, there will be no fever, but there will still be some headache. The incubation time for Staphylococcus aureus is 1 to 8 hours typically, and the duration, the time required for you to fully recover are 1 to 2 days. So usually the entire history of the entire food poisoning can last for 1 to 2 days until you're fully recovered. So some of the strategy to prevent getting Staphylococcus aureus is to avoid having the infected individuals handling the food. So if your kitchen staff is sick or is infected with Staphylococcus aureus, they shouldn't be handling the food. They should just call in sick and stay at home. You want to make sure you practice, the person who is handling the food practice good personal hygiene, and proper heating and cooling down is another way of preventing food contamination by Staphylococcus aureus. The next bacteria I'm going to introduce to you is the Bacillus cereus. As you can see, they are rod-shaped bacteria show in this photo. It is a gram-positive bacterium. It is a facultative aerobes. So this time they actually like oxygen. Okay, so if your environment is full of oxygen, it will promote the growth of B. cereus. And it will form spore, which is called endospore, which is heat resistant. So even if you apply heat to the spores, it's not easily destroyed. Their favorable growing conditions are within temperature between 8 to 55 degrees Celsius and with a slightly neutral or basic pH condition. It is commonly found in soy. The infective dose are usually set at least 10,000 vegetative cells of B. cereus per gram of food are ingested. So at least you need to find at least 10,000 vegetative cells of B. cereus found in 1 gram of food ingested will cause the illness associated with B. cereus. Potential contaminated food. So B. cereus causes 2 different types of food poisoning. Number one is the emetic type, meaning emetic means nausea and vomiting. So, and the food, the potential contaminated food is raw rice. So if you just eat the rice without cooking it, that can be a problem. And cooked rice as well. So basically, it's a rice. Rice is a big concern for B. cereus. The second type of food poisoning caused by B. cereus is the diarrhea type. So you can get abdominal cramps and diarrhea, which is found in food like meat. If you eat meat contaminated with B. cereus, or if you eat contaminated vegetables, pudding, and ice cream. So meat, vegetable, and dessert type of food. And the transmission of B. cereus is usually the improper storage. So for example, if you keep the cooked rice in room temperature, then that is the best environment to promote B. cereus growth. So never leave your cooked rice in room temperature. Okay, you either hold it hot or you properly cool it down and put it in the fridge for storage. B. cereus spores are heat resistant, so they can survive during cooking. Is what you need to pay attention. That's why once you cook the rice, you either finish it right away, or you need to store it properly to avoid B. cereus to grow in the rice. Okay, symptoms, we sort of talked about it earlier when we introduced the potential contaminated food. So the two types will give you the different incubation time as well as the symptoms. So for the emetic type, usually it's shorter incubation time, 1 to 5 hours, and your symptom can be resolved quicker within 6 to 24 hours. But if you are infected with the diarrheal type, the incubation time is slightly longer, 8 to 16 hours, and your symptom usually lasts a little bit longer, 12 to 24 hours. So we need to take some prevention measure to prevent getting foodborne illnesses with B. cereus. So first of all, avoid the pathogen. Number two, cook your food well, even though when we say the spores are heat resistant, but you still need to cook your food well. Refrigerate the food if you're not going to eat it, and proper reheating. Once you take your leftovers out from either the fridge or the freezer, you need to reheat it to the proper temperature. And we will move on to the very last one, which is the pathogenic Escherichia coli. It's abbreviated as E. coli. So I think E. coli, everyone is heard a lot about E. coli, either in the news, or you may actually have heard some real stories from families and friends who are infected with E. coli. So let's learn about E. coli. Again, it is a gram-negative bacterium. It is facultative aerobes, meaning it likes oxygen. It needs oxygen for survival reason. It is non-spore forming, doesn't form spores. And there are 4 major types of E. coli, so slightly complicated compared to all the other bacteria. So there is the enteropathogenic E. coli. Number 2, the entero-invasive E. coli. Number 3, the entero-hemorrhagic E. coli, meaning you'll get diarrhea as a symptom. And number 4 is the enterotoxigenic E. coli. So those are the 4 types of E. coli that we see for the food poisoning cases. So potential contaminated food include pasteurized milk, which is known as raw milk. Most of the milk that we drink at home these days are pasteurized. The ones that you buy in the supermarket or in the convenience store, they're usually underwent the pasteurization. If you eat raw or undercooked red meat, sorry, there's a typo there. It should be red meat, R-E-D, red meat, like your beef, pork, lamb, and also unpasteurized juice, unpasteurized apple juice, pear juice are also potential contaminated food. The transmission of E. coli include eating contaminated raw fruits and vegetables. If you swim in or drink the contaminated water, you have contact with a person who has poor hygiene and doesn't wash their hands regularly, or you have contact with infected animals. Say, for example, if you go to the zoo and you have some contact with the infected animals, you can get E. coli from it that way. So we'll take a short break before we move on to talk about the symptoms associated with E. coli.